What is going on, everybody? Welcome to the reveal of number 29 in my power rankings, a deep dive into the Oakland Raiders. And this is going to be a fun one because I don't think any team has changed as much as this team since our last deep dive series, especially over this last offseason. So it's going to be really fun to break this team down, talk about my expectations for this team. A quick reminder, please do hit that like button if you enjoy, if you learn something, you enjoy the series. It's the easiest way to share my content and support the channel. Also a reminder, if you're shopping for tickets, be it baseball, concerts, or pre-ordering some NFL tickets, use promo code ThatFranchiseGuy on SeatGeek where you'll get the best prices and seats anyway, so you might as well save $20 on your first purchase. And then before we dive in here, a quick recap of what this series is all about. So we'll do a little intro, then we're going to go through the roster, rank each position group, how they stack up against the rest of the league. And then you'll be looking at my custom Madden roster. So yes, it is a video game, but these are my own ratings, and they do accurately reflect how I kind of perceive each player. It's a good reflection and a nice graphic to use as we go through this thing. And then at the end, we're going to go through the schedule, talk game by game, and just look at the kind of Vegas over-under and talk about my expectations for this team. So let's get into it here with the Raiders. And like I said, this team's had a massive overhaul since we last did this. I think we ranked them like 25th last year, but that was before they even, traded away Khalil Mack for a bag of peanuts. And then the regular season went on, and I think the eye test would tell you that this was the worst team in the NFL next year. You could make an argument for the Cardinals for sure. But strictly from a roster point of view, I think the Raiders did have, before the offseason, the worst roster in the NFL. And then they kind of expedited their rebuild here with a ton of big moves. They trade for Antonio Brown. They spent a lot of money in free agency. And then they, of course, had all of those draft picks. After they trade away Amari Cooper, they trade away Khalil Mack, which, by the way, in my opinion, the worst trade in the NFL in my lifetime. Like, it literally makes no sense. You got essentially a first-round pick. There's no reason you should have had to include your second-round pick next year, which is not going to be that far away from the Bears' first-round pick. And then you do it because you say you can't pay him, yet you pay almost double the amount you would have had to pay Khalil Mack to the likes of Jordy Nelson, Tahir Whitehead, who might not start. You go out, you sign LaMarcus Joyner, Tyrell Williams. Like, I would take Khalil Mack for $21 million over those four for $40 every day of the week. So it just all makes no sense. They say that you can pay superstars more than $20 million that traditionally sets a lot of teams back. You can do that. You just can't mismanage the rest of your money like this team has kind of done, in my opinion. But that's a tangent. We're here to talk about this year. Khalil Mack is gone, and this team is looking towards the future. So let's get into the roster here, starting with the quarterback. They are going to rank 24th in the NFL. And Derek Carr, to me, has kind of entered that quarterback purgatory mode. Now, the only difference between Derek Carr and like Andy Dalton is that Derek Carr actually kind of has the physical tools to become more of a game-breaking elite type quarterback, closer to what we saw in 2015. Carr has that elite arm. He's got a nice release. He's very accurate downfield. The problem with him is I think like every year of his career, he's been top 5 in the NFL in time to throw. And if you're not Tom Brady, where your offense is predicated on quick hitting passes, catch and run receivers, that's a bad thing. You actually want your quarterbacks, if they're not under immediate pressure, to be looking beyond that first read, not just taking the check down, to actually, look for big plays, especially when you're a quarterback like Derek Carr. So it'll be interesting. They bring in Antonio Brown, Tyrell Williams, who are good deep threats. It'll be interesting to see if they actually, help Derek Carr open up his almost field vision in a way to get him out of this kind of quarterback purgatory game manager type. I don't personally believe that at this point in his career he is going to shake those tendencies to be a little more conservative or just miss open receivers downfield. Antonio Brown is an upgrade to Amari Cooper, but it's not like it's a crazy upgrade. It certainly is an upgrade. But in a way, I think this is a make or break season for Derek Carr. If this team wins 2 or 3 games and they have a top 2 or 3 pick next year, I strongly believe John Gruden's going to look to move on from Derek Carr. Yes, he might say that he believes in Derek Carr and he's going to coach him up and do best he can to win with him because that's his job as his coach, but he did not draft Derek Carr, and he really owes him nothing. So if Carr can't take that step up and elevate this offense, because it's going to have to be a good offense with how bad this defense should be, then I do think it might be time to move on from Derek Carr, and I think financially they're able to do that in terms of how his contract is structured. So behind him, you got Mike Glennon, career backup. And then behind him, I've got a take here about Nathan Peterman that I got to get out there. Now, I'm not going to stake my analytical career on him at this point, but I actually believe Nathan Peterman just might be the most underrated player in the NFL for the fact that he is literally the go-to laughing stock, considered the worst player in the NFL. I don't think that's the case. I think he can kind of rebound here and have a career as a backup. He has good physical tools. You got to remember, he at a time as a 5th round pick beat out the starting quarterback in the middle of the season for a playoff team with the Buffalo Bills, a team that had no talent offensively. He gets thrown into the Wolves in his first start against the Chargers, who at the time were probably the best pass defense in the NFL, throws 5 picks, and his career got derailed. I think he could settle in here in a better situation. If anything happened to Derek Carr, I wouldn't be surprised if they went to Nathan Peterman over Mike Glennon. I actually think he's a better player, believe it or not. And, I think he could have a Josh McCown type career as a backup and rebound. So just everyone stop hating on Nathan Peterman. Give the guy a chance. Realize how impossible that situation was in Buffalo, and that he actually impressed a smart coaching staff enough to bench Tyrod Taylor because they thought that Peterman gave them a higher ceiling. So, keep an eye on Peterman here. So at the end of the day, this season is going to hinge on Derek Carr. If he can get back to playing at that high level he did in that second season, was it 2015? This 29th ranking is not going to hold up. But he really hasn't given us much reason since then to believe that he can be anything more than an average quarterback in this league after that season. So then we're going to move on to the running backs here, where Josh Jacobs comes in as the first running back drafted. Now, I thought that was a terrible pick because this team has so many holes. I don't think you can justify paying or drafting a running back that high. That said, I am very high on Josh Jacobs. I think my comparison for him was actually Ezekiel Elliott, although he doesn't have the same, breakaway speed, but it does show on tape that speed, even if his 40 time wasn't very good. He's got elite one-cut ability. He shows signs of that like Saquon Barkley jump cut as well. He's an excellent receiver out of the backfield. I think he's going to be one of the top 12 running backs in the NFL this year. That said, I still think it was a bad pick. Now, he is going to help take a little pressure off of Derek Carr. We do know he likes those checkdowns, so it's going to be nice to have that weapon, and he's certainly going to help some things out. And I do actually rank the Raiders pretty high in terms of running back here, tied for 11th. So outside of Josh Jacobs, who I project to be the true number 1 guy, a real 3-down back, they did sign Isaiah Crowell, but he is not going to play. I believe it was an Achilles injury, so that's a wash. You got Jalen Richard. He's a good kind of relief pitching 3rd down back, a scat back, if you will. Could do worse for kind of a 3rd down wide receiver, though I don't know how much he's actually going to play because Josh Jacobs is that 3-down guy. And then Doug Martin will be more of the ball carrier in the event of Josh Jacobs being injured or tired. He can still play a little bit. He's not what he used to be, but you could do worse than a 1-2 punch of Doug Martin and Jalen Richard if anything happened to Josh Jacobs. Then you've got DeAndre Washington. He's played in spurts over the last couple years. He's never really overtaken Jalen Richard. I think he's going to take kind of a back seat. He might not even make this team this year. And then this team actually has quite the fascination with fullbacks because you got Chris Warren, who's more of an athletic type. Same thing with Keith Smith. And then they signed Alec Ingold, a really good blocking fullback out of Wisconsin. Then you also have something called a Ryan Urachek here. So they have technically 4 fullbacks on the roster when a lot of teams in the NFL don't even have one anymore. I don't really have any opinions on that. Apparently, John Gruden wants to use fullbacks in his offense. All right. So let's move on and talk about this receiving group, which has been significantly upgraded since the Amari Cooper trade. This was like the worst receiving core in the NFL at the point of that trade, but they go out and get Antonio Brown for really pennies on the dollar because of his off-the-field issues. Now, I don't expect Antonio Brown to be the same productive receiver that he was with Big Ben. For one, you had just that chemistry. You had a scheme in Pittsburgh that really knew how to utilize him. Also, a quarterback that was much more willing and able, I guess, to throw the ball deep. Now, maybe Derek Carr develops that rapport with Antonio Brown, who's one of the best deep ball receivers in NFL history. So that's kind of where I expect a drop-off from Antonio Brown, is those big chunk plays. But Antonio's also a really good short to intermediate receiver as well. He really does everything so well. So that's where I expect him to be really the big upgrade for this team, is slants, 15-yard ins, 15-yard outs, screens. He's going to get a lot of volume. I just don't really expect those big plays, and I expect the touchdown total to come down as well. And that's mostly just because there's no Big Ben now. And then they signed Tyrell Williams, and I did not think he was worth nearly the money they gave him. They gave him a 3-year, $33 million contract, or maybe even more than that. I mean, Tyrell Williams is a fast, big-bodied receiver, but he's never reached his potential. And, I mean, he was an undrafted guy to begin with. But I just don't think he can, dare I say, play. He has tremendous drop issues, not coming down with a lot of contested catches. He's not like a great route runner. His physical abilities allow him to get open on schemed open, deep crossers or streak routes. But he's just not a polished receiver. He's not worth the money they paid him. I don't know if he's going to be much better than J.J. Nelson, who they picked up on the cheap, who's another just kind of burner. So I expect there to be kind of a competition there on the outside between Tyrell Williams and J.J. Nelson. I just don't know if the gap is that big between those two. Tyrell Williams will win it out. And then I love the Hunter Renfrow pick in the 5th round. I think he's going to start right away in the slot, and I think he's going to be more productive than any receiver here outside of Antonio Brown. Like I've said with Derek Carr, he's not really looking to throw the ball deep. I think we're going to get a lot of Hunter Renfrow, who's basically a carbon copy of Adam Humphries coming out of Clemson about 4 years ago. But I think Renfrow and Josh Jacobs, even Jalen Richard in the short game, are going to have a lot of volume in this offense that's probably going to be playing from behind a lot because of this defense. So I expect some pretty high reception totals there for Hunter Renfrow. And then you've got Marcel Aitman, big-bodied 7th-round pick last year, who showed some things at the end of last year. I don't know if he's going to get on the field a whole lot here. They did bring in Ryan Grant. Kind of done believing in him after he couldn't work out with Andrew Luck. I did like picking up Keelan Doss as an undrafted free agent. And then you got guys like Keon Hatcher, Saeed Blacknail, Dwayne Harris is here as a kick returner, Brian Burt. You're going to have some competition there for probably the 6th spot on this roster between those 6 names I just mentioned, or 5 minus Dwayne Harris, who will probably make the team. And then you've got the tight ends here. They let Jared Cook go, who's actually been really good in Oakland the last couple of years, and he got a decent contract from New Orleans. But they make up for it because they took one of my favorite players in the draft, regardless of position, with Foster Murrow. Really athletic, smart tight end out of LSU, was underutilized, as is pretty much every skill player coming out of LSU, but I think he's going to get in the mix sooner rather than later. Now, they do have Derek Carrier and Luke Wilson, who are kind of veterans here who have started at times in their career, but I think Foster Murrow is going to end up winning that job eventually, maybe not out of training camp, but I think they got an absolute steal there. I think there are a lot of worse tight ends that got drafted ahead of Murrow. And same thing can be said about him as we said about Renfrow and Josh Jacobs. I think they did add some good short to intermediate targets despite all of their money really going towards Antonio Brown and Tyrell Williams, who are more deep threat kind of guys. And then you got some depth here as well. They have Darren Waller, who's just an absolute freak athlete, a converted wide receiver type, who's had some, I think it's pot-related suspensions. So can he stay on the field, make an impact? I doubt it, but we'll see. And then you got Eric Swope. Waller, by the way, he's the perfect example of a guy who, as OTAs are starting, he'll make a catch on a 5-yard crossing route. And you'll get a tweet like, Darren Waller on the field looking good, could be poised for a breakout year. He's the perfect example of that kind of hype training camp guy. I don't even know if he's going to make the team. And then you got Eric Swoop, Paul Butler, who are going to compete to make this team. So as a whole, it's a damn good group of wide receivers. We got them ranked tied for 5th. I don't think Antonio Brown's going to really be the best wide receiver in the NFL anymore. He's kind of had that crown for a couple years. I think that's pretty safely in DeAndre Hopkins' hands right now. But he's certainly still a top 10 guy, if not top 5. We'll see how he kind of plays out with Derek Carr. And then I like kind of the depth that they have between Williams, Renfrow, Josh Jacobs as a receiver, Foster Murrow. even like Luke Wilson, you could do worse as a receiving tight end. John Gruden's going to have a fun time kind of dialing up some ways to get these guys open, and they're all pretty athletic dudes, so we should see some explosive games depending on matchup from Derek Carr and these wide receivers. And then you look at the offensive line. It's a very average group in my opinion, which it does say a lot because last year you could make an argument that this was the worst in the NFL. I mean, there's a lot of bad offensive lines out there, and when you have a center like Rodney Hudson, a decent guard like Gabe Jackson, you're at least going to get some protection in there. But the tackles last year were probably the worst tackle duo in the NFL, and that's really where it starts in terms of pass protection. So at the tackles this year, you got Colton Miller in his second year, and just because he's a first-round pick does not mean he's a good player. I mean, look at Eric Flowers and how long that Giants team stuck with him because he was a first-round pick. Colton Miller's first year was reminiscent of that. Like, he was really just awful as a tackle. And then they were starting, I believe it was Brandon Parker, right? Not David Sharp at the other tackle. Well, he's going to take a seat now as they bring in Trent Brown for a ton of money. Trent Brown's a good tackle, not great. They're paying him now like a great tackle, but that's what you got to do to get these starting caliber tackles in there. It's certainly an upgrade, don't get me wrong. He's going to help stabilize the pass protection here. He's a good run blocker as well. You know who he basically is? Do you guys remember Phil Loadholt for the Vikings? Just a massive body, like moves his feet quicker than he should at that size, and he's going to struggle against certain matchups. Like he is just massive. He's like not 600 pounds, like 355 pounds, 6'8". Like at that size, when you go up against, say, like a Brian Burns or Von Miller maybe in this division, like they're just going to run around you. And there's going to be times where he might not look like a guy that's worth $15 million. But if you're not against like an elite speed rusher, he's just so big and strong and he's quick enough that he's just going to stonewall you. So it was a good signing. They definitely needed to do it because whoever they were lining up at tackle last year was not the answer. And even Colton Miller's got his questions. So, if Colton Miller can take a huge step up in year 2, then this offensive line's actually going to be pretty good. But I do think that is still going to be a pretty big weakness there at left tackle. Just his technique's not good enough, and he's not strong enough to hang with some of these power rushers in this league. And then on the inside, it's actually pretty solid because Rodney Hudson's just a freak. He's one of the best linemen in the NFL. Gabe Jackson's just a really solid starter. And then they just picked up Richie Incognito, who's probably going to start at left guard, assuming all the off-field things check out. Now, if he doesn't play, you do have a pretty big question at left guard. Is it going to be Denzel Good, Lester Cotton? Do they maybe kick Brandon Parker inside? Lester Cotton, a good undrafted pickup, by the way, out of Alabama. So, hopefully they can get Richie Incognito on the field. I don't think he'll be what he used to be. If he is, then, maybe he helps out Colton Miller at left tackle. And if you get, Richie Incognito close to him in his prime and Colton Miller to play like a top 15 pick, then this will be one of the best offensive lines in the NFL, but there's just too many question marks there, and that's why this comes in as kind of a middling group. So it's going to be one of those offensive lines, in my opinion, more likely than not, that just kind of allows you to do what you want to do, as opposed to actually helping you do what you want to do. But that's kind of the tier difference. You got the great offensive lines that help you dominate, some that just don't get in your way of being a good team, and some that just hinder your ability to call the kind of plays that you want to call. So I think it's going to sit in the middle there. So the offense as a whole is going to come in 21st, which is pretty respectable for this ranking. I do think there's a little bit of upside there if Derek Carr can get back to his old self, and if this offensive line can take those steps up we were talking about, this could become a top 10 offense. Now, I'm not projecting that to happen, but if it did, it wouldn't totally surprise me. And then let's talk about the defense, and I'm going to try to pick up the pace a little bit here. My last one was like 36 minutes long, my last deep dive, so let's try and cut that down. So the big picture here is this defense is not very good. They don't have a single strength on this team. The interior defensive line is fine, so we'll start with the run defense here, where they're going to rank tied for 23rd. Love Maurice Hurst. He really came on late last year. He fell to the 5th round. He had no business falling that far. He was a top 12 player in that class, in my opinion. He played well. He didn't play like an elite defensive prospect in his first year, but he certainly played very well. And he very well might be the best defensive player on this entire team. Then you got Jonathon Hankins, really good run defending nose tackle. Justin Ellis, I believe, was on IR last year. He's going to come back. He's a good nose tackle. So between those three, you've got some good interior linemen. PJ Hall was a second-round pick last year. He's not half the player Maurice Hurst is. It's kind of funny that he went so much higher than Hurst. Really kind of struggled in his rookie year. He was a little more raw coming out, so maybe they get something from him as a pass rusher on the inside. I also like Eddie Vanderdoes, who's had a hard time kind of getting on the field, but he's a high-profile athlete, a third-round pick in 2017. If he can be healthy, I would actually look for him to emerge as kind of the starting pass rushing interior guy next to Maurice Hurst. I think he can really play. He just has to stay on the field. So you do like the interior defensive line here, and I think that's a big reason this team didn't draft Ed Oliver, because you look at the rest of this team, they have so many holes. On the interior defensive line, the run defense, they're actually pretty set. And they've got some veteran linebackers here. They should be able to play the run pretty well. Not that that really matters, but you like what you have in terms of beef on the inside. And then you've got the edge rush here, which is, as we knew heading into this offseason, really bad. They traded away Khalil Mack, and ever since then, they've been looking for anyone that can get after the quarterback. And that's what they did. First big move in the draft, they draft Clelin Ferrell. A lot of people thought it was a reach, myself included. But the thing is, Ferrell probably was, as we kept saying in the pre-draft process, the most polished edge rusher in the class. They caught some flack for not taking Josh Allen. My big take before the draft was that Josh Allen's not going to be an impact pass rusher. He needs to kind of learn a new position because he played a lot of off-ball at Kentucky. And a lot of his sacks were not, traditional one-on-one beating a guy like you saw more with Clelin Ferrell, who has a more refined skill set. So did they overdraft him? Maybe. If they couldn't trade down, this was their guy. I didn't grade this pick out very well, but if he led all rookies in sacks, it really wouldn't surprise me, especially if Nick Bosa got hurt. So he's going to be their number one guy. Right away, he's probably a middle-level number 2 edge rusher. That was kind of my thing with him, though, was that he doesn't really have the physical upside to be a true number 1, but he could be a high-level number 2. His absolute upside would be Everson Griffin. I don't know if he's going to get to that level because Griffin is a number 1, or at least he was in his prime. I just don't know if he has the really explosiveness to be that good, but he does have a really nice get-off like Everson Griffin. So, Ferrell's going to be a solid number 1 for this team, but then number 2 pass rusher is a massive, massive question. You've got Arden Key, who in my opinion is effectively a bust. He seems to me like that classic 5-star prospect that got drafted basically off of physical ability and pedigree coming out of high school, just never really has worked at his craft and developed. I don't know why that's going to change now. Then you draft Max Crosby in the 4th round. I like him, but I see him as more of a rotational 3rd or 4th, almost like a change of pace pass rusher. I do like Josh Murrow to be kind of that starting defensive end on first down to play good run defense. You got Alex Barrett. Benson Mayowa actually had a good year for Arizona last year. If he ended up being more of the starter here, that really wouldn't surprise me. But you're basically throwing darts and prayers at that second defensive end position because I don't see a starter in this group, at least a 3-down starter. So the pass rush for me is going to come in tied for 27th. And that's actually helped by Maurice Hurst, who's possibly this team's best pass rusher, depending on how good Clelin Ferrell is as a rookie. And then when you talk about these linebackers here, it's a super deep room, but they don't really have any studs. You got Brandon Marshall, who's an aging veteran, still can probably play a little bit. Tahir Whitehead, who was just a massive overpay, who might not even start here. Vontaze Burfict comes in with his dad body. I just don't think he's really fit for the modern NFL. He's just not fast enough. We've seen a lot of these bigger thumping linebackers get kind of aged out. I do like Markel Lee. He can move. I thought they had an excellent pickup in Tavon Coney. You got Jason Cabinda, who was an undrafted free agent last year, who I liked. Kyle Wilbur, who had his time in the sun in Dallas. James Kouser, Koa Farmer, Quentin Bell. This team, also Nicholas Murrow, who's a really athletic guy that you would kind of match into that tier with Markel Lee and some of these more athletic guys. They've thrown more darts at this linebacker position than probably any team in the NFL this offseason, which I do respect because there's still teams out there like the Green Bay Packers, Cincinnati Bengals come to mind, that for whatever reason believe that you don't need linebackers in the modern NFL, or at least you don't need to invest in them. And I couldn't disagree more. I think with the way that offenses are going with these short, quick-hitting passing games, you need linebackers that can fly to the football. And I think that those two teams we just named, their defenses have really struggled the last couple of years because they don't have guys that can fly around and make plays. So I like that they're just having a ton of competition in what, in my opinion, might be the most significant position on a defense these days, which sounds crazy, which with how much we talk about edge rushers and corners, it's all important. But there's definitely some undervaluing going on at the linebacker position. So, I really like the depth, I like the competition here, but at the end of the day, you're not pointing to any single one guy as like a game-changing player. Maybe someone emerges through the competition, or Brandon Marshall can be what he once was, but that all seems kind of likely if you look at just the talent in this room. And then you've got the coverage unit here, and this is really what's going to drag this team down, in my opinion. Coverage is so important these days. I know we just went on a tangent about linebackers and their importance, but you need corners and safeties that can hang as well. And just like we kind of saw a lot of times last year, this defense is really going to struggle against the pass at times. So at corner, you've got Garyon Conley, who, good first-round pick a couple years ago. He actually came on late, and I do like him. He's probably going to be this team's best corner. But then you've got, probably Trayvon Mullen starting, who was a solid pick. I actually was higher on Trayvon Mullen. Now, I thought that they would have been better off taking, Greedy Williams, who is just a much higher ceiling. But they went with maybe a safer pick. I don't know. I wouldn't say he's safer than Greedy Williams. But Trayvon was a really good corner at Clemson. His upside to me is like a Xavier Rhodes. Might be a little stiffer, might struggle on non-vertical routes, just because he lacks that true quickness. But he should be a solid number 2 corner. You don't really know what you're getting from him as a rookie corner, which it has been really hard for rookie corners to come in and make an impact right away. And then in the nickel, it's a little up in the air. I've gotten into it with Raiders fans already because all the reports are that LaMarcus Joyner is going to be playing nickel corner. And that's great, but this is kind of a prime example of, don't always believe everything you see from beat writers and on Twitter. The best way to follow what a team is going to do is follow the money. So I get it, Raiders fans, that you're hearing that LaMarcus Joyner is going to play nickel corner for this team. For one, this team signed Nevin Lawson from Detroit, who's a top 20 nickel corner. But more importantly, just look at the contract. If you want to know what your team's doing, follow the money. No nickel corner was getting paid like LaMarcus Joyner got with a 4-year, $40 million contract. That is a safety contract and a free safety contract, which, by the way, is what he's played for the last 2 years for the Rams. So as far as I'm concerned, LaMarcus Joyner will be playing free safety, not nickel corner, despite all of the reports. So I would guess Nevin Lawson's going to start in the nickel. He's been okay for Detroit there in the nickel. He's not a dominant nickel corner, but good enough. And then Nick Nelson's also going to compete. I liked him coming out. Now, he was coming off a pretty significant kind of pre-draft process injury. So if he can come back healthy, have a full offseason of camp, I wouldn't be surprised if he competed with Nevin Lawson in the nickel. I liked him coming out. He's got great quickness to play that position. So you really got, in my opinion, 4 corners that can kind of play here, but none of them are anywhere close to elite unless Garyon Conley takes a big leap. Then you got Tevin Mitchell, Daryl Worley, Isaiah Johnson, a 4th-round pick this year, who's kind of a freak athlete. I wouldn't expect him to make a big impact as a rookie. Mackinton Dorlant, these guys are all going to kind of compete. So you could do worse at corner. And then at safety, I like what they have. Like I said, we're listing LaMarcus Joyner as a free safety as far as I'm concerned. And then the Jonathon Abram pick, I thought this was a bad pick in the first round. Good player, but he doesn't have great cover skills, and he's redundant with what you have in Carl Joseph. So does this team try to trade Carl Joseph? What do they do with him? Because I think Jonathon Abram should be a day 1 starter. He's a fantastic run defender, very physical. He's okay in coverage, but I don't think he's, super rangy or great in man. And then you also have Eric Harris, who I think they just gave a contract extension to. So you're about 4 deep at safety in terms of guys who can play here. But again, no elite talent here. LaMarcus Joyner is a good rangy player, but at the end of the day, he's a 5'9" safety who does show some inconsistencies at times because of his size. Karl Joseph's never had a stable career. And then you got a rookie in Jonathon Abram, who I see as kind of like a Morgan Burnett, Barry Church type of player, not an elite safety. So they're not going to be terrible. I just don't see a lot of kind of matchup problems or dominant players in the secondary here, and that's why they come out at 25th. And as a whole, I do have this team as the worst defense in the NFL. And I get that they brought in a lot of new pieces, but this defense was absolutely steamrolled for most of last season. I don't think they brought in any true game-changing players, although they did bring in some upgrades like Furl and Joyner. But I don't think those are pieces that are going to be elite impacts that really elevate this team out of the gutter. And then for coach and culture, this is really what's going to be a pivot point outside of Derek Carr for this team. Is I actually think Jon Gruden can coach, at least offense. But there's just so many questions about this team in general. Personally, I think they're going to be on Hard Knocks, which it sounds weird to say, but year after year, it's almost like the team that's on Hard Knocks comes out slow and has a bad culture. It's almost like that's the laughingstock team of the year. You got so many holes on this defense. They don't really have an identity on that side of the ball. And then you have a bunch of just kind of locker room headaches, potentially, with Antonio Brown, Vontaze Burfict, Richie Incognito. Now, those can work out if you're winning. But if this team starts losing games out the gate, which I think they will, because we're going to look at the schedule in just a second, then that can really snowball your team. So it's a big question mark in terms of coach and culture here, even though I think Jon Gruden is a solid offensive coach. I just don't know if he's going to be able to contain all of this. And then you throw in the fact that this team's moving to Vegas. It's just a lot of question marks about this culture. So let's wrap up by looking at the schedule here. So Vegas has this team over under at 6.5 wins. And I think that's because a lot of people love to buy into the Raiders. They've been one of the most hyped teams of the last 5 years. I think a lot of people think Derek Carr is better than he really is, and just bringing in Antonio Brown, having Jon Gruden there, I think a lot of people are betting on this team. And I've actually heard podcasts out there picking the Raiders to win this division, be the surprise team of the year. I just don't see that, and I'm sure a lot of Raiders fans are going to come at me for that, but you just don't completely overhaul a team like this in 1 year, and I don't fully agree with all the moves they've made. So I'm going to go under here. I think they could win the first game of the year at home against Denver. Should be a pretty hyped up game, but then I've got them ripping off 6 losses in a row. Just look at that stretch. That is almost impossible. You've got Patrick Mahomes coming to town. Then you got to go to Minnesota, go to Indianapolis. They're not going to win those. They play Chicago in London. Maybe they sneak that one out, but I don't see that happening against that defense. Then you got to go to Green Bay and go to Houston. That's just an impossible stretch. I don't know how you can take the over at 6.5 when you're going to start 1-6, almost guaranteed. And then you got Detroit, the Chargers, the Bengals at home. They should rip off some wins there, but those teams aren't pushovers by any means, especially the Chargers. Then you got to go to the Jets. Maybe they pull that off. You got to go to Kansas City. You got Tennessee at home. Then you got Jacksonville. It gets a little easier in the second half of the schedule here. But like I said, if this team starts 1-6, I don't see this as the kind of team that has the leadership that's going to just turn it all around all of a sudden. And then you got to end the season 2 road games in the division against really good defenses. So I've got this team 5-11, and that might be optimistic. The win range for me is 2-6, so that's on the optimistic end of my win range. So I actually think the under here is a very safe bet, and I got to be careful talking about betting. Gamble responsibly, guys. YouTube's taking a stance against sports gambling, so yeah, let's just throw that in there. That's gonna do it for the Raiders here. I'm excited to talk to Raiders fans. I know they're gonna come at me because they're a very passionate fan base. Personally, I would have sold my Raiders jerseys and bought a Jimmy Garoppolo jersey because your team's leaving you anyway. Maybe this team proves me wrong, but I don't see this Raiders team really having that breakout season like a lot of experts are predicting. We'll see how it all plays out. That's going to do it for this video. Again, please hit that like button. Really helps me out. Looking forward to talking to you guys in the comments. Cheers as always, and we'll see you next time. Peace out.